The journey of caring for a loved one who is living with dementia can be quite challenging. The aim of this podcast is to make caregiving less daunting and more fulfilling. On this platform, we share knowledge, understanding, and experiences. We enlighten, give hope, and encourage, and in the process, create positive awareness about different aspects of dementia. Welcome to my podcast, Dementia Caregivers Corner. My name is Julia Ratladi. Dementia Care, how deep is your love?
In today's episode, we have a board-certified neurologist who was named Dementia Care Professional of the Year 2015 by the Alzheimer's Foundation of America. After guiding patients and their caregivers through the journey of dementia for most of her career in private practice, she took a sabbatical to refocus her clinic to help the children of her patients adopt lifestyle changes to reduce their risk of developing Alzheimer's disease or another dementia. She also wrote a book to share her expertise and knowledge with a wider audience. The book is called Brain Health Action Plan, Simple Science-Backed Lifestyle Changes that Optimize Cognitive Fitness and Reduce Alzheimer's Disease. Welcome into today's episode, none other than Dr. Clarke. Let me say that.
Thank you so much for having me, Julia. I really appreciate getting to share knowledge and hopefully some really practical steps with your listeners.
Before we start, let us know where are we connecting from, because we talk with people from around the world. Where are you?
I'm in Southern California, so it's early my time, 7 o'clock here.
Oh, it's 3 p.m. here. Oh, that's early.
Yeah, not too bad. I'm an early riser, so it works out okay.
Oh, good then. Let's get into it, Dr. Clarke. The episode that is going to air in 2 weeks' time from now, because our episodes are fortnightly. In that episode, I was having a conversation with a young person whose mother lives with dementia in Namibia, Africa. You know, he shared with me some of the struggles that he faced as an individual, the struggle that they faced as a family. So when I was reading through your profile, I couldn't help but notice that you refocus your clinic to assist the people or the children whose parents lived with dementia. I want to know why. Why that niche? Do you perhaps think that they might be at risk of developing the illness themselves?
Well, a couple reasons. Seeing my patients later in life, I could see in retrospect which lifestyle habits had really helped them perhaps delay the onset of their dementia. And then there's a really selfish reason that I did it. And that's because my mom and both of her parents suffered from dementia. My mom and grandmother from Alzheimer's disease, and my grandfather from cerebrovascular disease or vascular dementia. So I'm highly motivated. And, you know, one of the things I think that your listeners might be able to relate to is, for example, when I see a new doctor and I go in, my dad had a heart attack at 59 years old. And so I list that in my family history. And then I list that my mother was diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease at age 69. And every doctor's appointment's the same. They look at that health history and they see the young heart disease and they go, oh my goodness, you have heart disease in your family. We've got to be really aggressive about managing all your risk factors. And we've got this whole plan of attack, how we're going to keep my heart healthy, which is great. And then they look at the history from my mom and say, oh, and your mom had Alzheimer's disease. Ugh. And there's no plan of attack, no identification of risk factors, you know. And so I realized for myself that I had to seek out what I wanted to do in terms of making my own preventative health action plan for my brain. And so I want to share that with the children of my patients, because there is a lot we can do. And I don't think there's enough guidance out there. So, you know, when I mentioned it to my patients' kids, almost every one of them said, I want to be your first patient. So I know there's a lot of motivation. I know there's hunger for knowledge. So I want to share what I've come to understand as great management of our risk factors so we can push this as far away from us as possible.
So you believe that when they are informed with that knowledge at an early age, that could be advantageous for them going forward in the future?
Absolutely. Taking charge of your health and your risk factors for Alzheimer's disease, the earlier you do it, the better. It's like saving for your retirement. If you can start doing that when you're 30 or 40, you're going to get tremendous benefits later. If you start at 50 or 60, the changes are way more dramatic. Or in that analogy, you have to save way more money to see the benefits in retirement. And it's exactly the same with brain health. So there's just never too early of a time, and there actually isn't too late. Always something can be done.
Yeah, I'm thinking right now, I'm thinking of taking the information to primary school going students, pupils, because if now we start from there, the grassroots, we will definitely go far. We will push it as far away as possible from us.
Yes, I think there are definitely some dietary and environmental risk factors that, it would be great if we could address them in childhood.
Good. All right. I normally start by asking what dementia is. I'm come from Botswana, it's in Africa. And yes, I'm here in the UK. But I didn't know anything about dementia, didn't know anything about Alzheimer's up until 4 years ago. And the aim of this podcast really is to create awareness about dementia to everyone, really, to people who have limited information about dementia, to people with no information at all. Why? Because I've come across cases of people, they only get to know about dementia when it's in the family. Otherwise, they have no idea of what it is. So I'm going to ask you to describe what dementia is in layman's terms. And that's to give us maybe 2 or 3 examples of common dementias and how they manifest in the people that they may be living with dementia.
I love the opportunity to explain it because I feel like so many times in the lay press, in newspapers, on TV, the terms dementia and Alzheimer's disease are used interchangeably, and they're really not the same thing. And so it does lead to a lot of confusion. And you're right, if somebody hasn't lived through this and gone to doctor's visits and really learned what these different terms mean, it can be so confusing. So dementia is really a description of a symptom, and that symptom is not being able to do things you previously could do. For example, pay bills, drive a car, choose your clothing appropriate to, the weather and the occasion. And so it's really a description of how somebody's brain is working and the things they can do. And so it's a symptom of an underlying problem. A way to think about the difference between dementia and Alzheimer's disease is think of dementia like a fever. It's a symptom that something is going on, and that's how it's manifesting in your body. And so then the question is, if you went to the doctor with a fever, you'd be wondering what's causing the fever. And similarly, if you left the doctor's office and the diagnosis was you have a fever, you'd probably be pretty dissatisfied because you want to know what the problem is so you can address it and understand what it's going to turn into and look like in the future. So similarly, when somebody has a change in their thinking that causes them to not be able to do the things they previously were able to do, we would describe that as functioning at a level of dementia. And then the question would be, what disease is causing them to function at that level? So it could be Alzheimer's disease. It could be something like small strokes building up in the brain. We call that vascular disease. It could be something other than that, like Parkinson's disease or Lewy body disease. And your caregivers who are dealing with this up close and personal may already know how those look differently in terms of the dementia symptoms they produce. People with Lewy body disease tend to have more visual problems. And so they might see a shadow in the corner and think there's a small animal there or a mouse or something like that. They have a lot of visual interpretation issues. Somebody with Alzheimer's disease typically starts out with pure forgetfulness very quickly. In 5 minutes to 30 minutes, they can forget conversations. They may have language problems. And then people with vascular dementia sometimes have more judgment issues early on in the course of their dementia. So, and those things all have different treatments and ramifications for what day-to-day life looks like at home. So it's really important to identify what disease is causing them to function at that level so caregivers can understand how to work with them, how to change the environment at home to make it more conducive to them thriving and being able to stay home as long as possible.
Thank you. I did take care of someone who was living with vascular dementia. Mostly she would be emotional most of the time.
Yes.
Crying a lot. I don't know whether you have any idea of how people should assist that person who is living with dementia, who are emotional. Do you have like strategies that we can use to assist them?
Yeah, I think one of the communication strategies that I talk to patients, families, and caregivers about, especially if there are emotional and judgment issues, I kind of frame it as, I'm sure you talk a lot about distracting into other things and, not confronting them and trying to convince them. And so where you can find gentle ways to accept what they're expressing, because to them it's totally real. Their logic centers are affected by these diseases as well. And so if you're looking at a situation where somebody thinks, you're stealing my money from me, you can go through and get their bank statement and show them the number and have this whole discussion. And it seems logical to you. Even if you do convince them that their money's there and you're not stealing it, which probably you won't, but even if you do, that conviction for them of everything's fine is usually so temporary because they forget it. And so, where you can kind of defer, where you can accept what they're saying without over endorsing the wrong thing. So, you're stealing my money from me. Mm-hmm. You can say, I know that your money's there and you don't need to worry, but why don't we talk to your banker next week? Let's make an appointment to talk with your banker. And you just kind of keep kicking the can. You give some reassurance. You assure them that you've listened to and you've heard their concerns, and then some kind of procrastination tool. Another example I would give is, in patients where the back of their brain is affected, maybe in Lewy body disease, or sometimes in vascular dementia, when they have a perception that's really off, like this is like the ultimate example, but they look out and they go, the sky is purple, and you see that the sky is blue. You can go through a whole logical discussion of why the sky is blue, because the atmosphere reflecting off the ocean. I mean, you could do that and exhaust yourself. Mm-hmm. Or you could have some packed up responses in your pocket that are non-confrontational, that acknowledge that they've said something neutral like, oh, that's interesting, or I've never seen it that way, or is it now? Just to accept what they're saying, not confront them, and move on, because ultimately a lot of those conversations are not that important and they're exhausting. And the more you have those packed up in your pocket, kind of ready to go, takes the thinking out for the caregiver, and it's one less kind of thing you're dealing with in your day. And, you're not really endorsing that the sky's purple, but you're not saying it's not. It's not worth having the discussion of convincing them. So I hope that's helpful for your listeners. I'm sure a lot of them have already developed their own things they've got in their pocket that they automatically say just to diffuse those situations and kind of move on.
Yes. I'm laughing when you're sharing that because at one point I went with this lady the same lady that I cared for to a restaurant, and there was somebody who was seated behind us. They were talking loudly on the phone and she got agitated by that. She stood up and just shouted at this person. And so, because when you talk of out of the pocket thing, I had a piece of paper written, I live with dementia, So after we tried to calm everything down, and I was trying to talk to the person who was caused my client to be agitated. And so before we settled down, I took out that paper from my pocket behind and I just showed it to her. And she said, it's okay. I understand.
Yeah, people are so understanding once they know the situation. And, so many people have been touched by these diseases and lived with them in their family. I feel like people are understanding, but it's great to have a piece of paper just to be sure they don't take offense and that they do understand.
Okay. Yes. Now I want us to get into the main topic, Dr. Clarke. I really want you to dwell on this one. We want to keep dementia as far away as possible from us. And you've got some things written in your book that can help us with that. Please let us list those, whether it's strategies or what we should do to keep it away from us. Let us talk about that. take as much time as you can with this one, because that's the main thing for me.
Yeah. Well, I think there is really good news in the space of dementia prevention, and that is that we know that 40% of dementias are related to 12 lifestyle risk factors. So one of the great things about that is you don't have to take a medicine to minimize your risk greatly. You can change your lifestyle. And so those fall into big categories like exercise, nutrition, sleep, managing your stress, continuing to stimulate your brain with lifelong education. And so, what I hope to do is just empower people to take advantage of the science and the data we have that shows how important these lifestyle risk factors are and start, just little by little making changes. So in the book, what I tried to do is break those down by categories and then give people the data that specifically shows, for example, that doing exercise can protect the hippocampi, those memory structures for short-term memory that shrink early on in Alzheimer's disease. Doing exercise, we know, can help preserve especially the left-sided one, which is the one that usually shrinks first in Alzheimer's disease. So we have the data that shows us that these interventions are important. And then I connect them to little action steps that you can take to try to adopt new habits. I know there are a lot of people out there who aren't exercising at all, and they may think they don't like to exercise, but we can start just making little changes, moving more throughout our day, taking more breaks from being sedentary. That really seems to be what's important. I'll give you a great example of it. There was a study that showed that they compared people who exercised 1 hour a day to people who exercised 1 hour but broken up throughout the day and didn't break a sweat. And what they found were that people who did 2 minutes of moving around 30 times a day, which is a lot, that's every half an hour for 15 hours. So it's really every half an hour of your day. They found that those people did as well as the people who exercised in devoted exercise for an hour a day. So for me, I probably don't get up every half an hour for 2 minutes, but I do at least move for 5 minutes an hour, averaged out through my day. And that's not sweating. I might get up, I might do a couple squats when I do take a break from being sedentary. There's just a lot of little ways we can get movement into our day that doesn't trigger a lot of the things that some people don't like about exercise, which is, getting dirty, having to be on the floor, having to sweat. You can do push-ups against the wall, against your desk, against the kitchen table. There are a lot of ways to capture the benefits of exercise without all the negatives that are holding people apart from. And I think people get intimidated when they think about exercise. They think they have to go CrossFit. They think they have to go do some crazy thing. It's just little movements. It's walking. It's a little bit of movement exercise. And another thing, I think, the more we understand some of the reasons that these lifestyle factors help us prevent dementia, a direct connection between the muscles and the brain, for example, has been discovered. That's something called myokines. They're hormones that the muscles release in response to movement and exercise. One of those hormones is called brain-derived neurotrophic factor. That actually helps our neurons grow and the neurons or the brain cells we have in our brain survive throughout our lifetime. So when you move, whether it's in hardcore exercise or just doing a couple squats in the middle of your day or walking because you're moving those big muscles of your legs, your body is releasing these hormones that help support your brain health directly. So those are some of the exciting discoveries in science that I've highlighted in the book. Because I think once you understand that direct connection, it makes it, it helps provide motivation to move.
Yes, I'm already seeing my friends who, when I mention let's move, they thinking of what you just said. But when you describe it, there's motivation. I feel like when they listen to you, they're going to get motivated to say it's not like it's a tedious task to do. It's just a movement. Just move from upstairs, downstairs to the kitchen, make a cup of tea, and that's a movement, right?
Yeah. And I even, I try to build in silly little extras throughout my day. When I do my laundry, it's upstairs. So I go up the stairs, do my laundry, and then I'll take an extra 2 or 3 flights up and down the stairs. It's not much. I don't sweat, but I just realized like, I just want to get extra myokines released from my muscles, And so if I can do a little here or there, I won't complain. I'm in America, so I drive. I'm in California. I drive everywhere. So, even there's one street near me where sometimes I have quite a few errands. And so instead of driving all those errands, I'll park at one of them and then walk to the rest. It probably adds 15 minutes, but I'm getting quite a bit more exercise than I would have just getting in and out of my car. So finding ways you can just build in a little bit extra, an extra flight of stairs, a farther walk at the grocery store, any of that, it makes a difference.
Thank you. Does smoking and alcohol, are they risk factors to dementia?
Alcohol. Okay, so this is an area where I've really shifted my viewpoint over the past several years.
Okay.
I do a lot of speaking in the community, talking to people about risk factors like this. I just want to get everybody on the same page on trying to prevent dementia and optimizing their brain health. And so, a lot of us in the neurology community for a long time really were focused on one study out of France that seemed to show that 2 drinks per day of alcohol, in any alcohol really, spirits, wine, or beer, was optimal for brain health. And then the question was, if you don't drink, should you start drinking? If you drink more than that, certainly those guidelines would be to come down to 2 drinks per day.
Yeah.
But as we look at more and more and more data that's collected, it seems to be that level of alcohol probably is harmful to the brain. We know that alcohol is neurotoxic, meaning it directly harms neurons. And so we do want to minimize that exposure as much as possible. So anywhere people are on the spectrum of enjoying alcohol, making a slight shift downward will pay dividends. So I would encourage people, to try to cut back their use a bit. If they drink multiple drinks in the same day, including spacers, to try to maybe cut out 1 or 2 of those drinks per day, trying to cut down to maybe perhaps if they're a daily drinker, trying to cut down to weekends only, and then trying to cut down further from there. There's a really great study out of the UK actually that looked at 25,000 people, and they found that people who were drinking 14 drinks per week, or that 2 per day, they actually did worse than people that were drinking less than that. So anywhere you can find to cut down will be beneficial. I think there's a bit of a movement right now of people trying sobriety who have previously enjoyed alcohol and not cutting down because they think they have an alcohol problem per se, but cutting down to see how they feel. I'm one of those people. After my son's 21st birthday, I realized that I had been, drinking more than I had been previously during COVID. I mean, there was not much else to do. So my husband and I were having a glass of wine after work every day.
I know.
Yeah. And I'm also in that middle of life phase where red wine makes me sweat all night. So I had already cut that out. Yes. So I thought, well, I'm just going to give it a go and not have any alcohol for a month and see how I feel. And I feel like my evenings are way more productive. I feel more focused in general. I feel more healthy. My body composition's a bit better. And so I really haven't gone back. I've had, maybe a couple glasses of champagne over the last couple of years, but I actually also lost my taste for it. The champagne that I used to love and was my favorite tastes a bit vinegary. And first the first time I had a glass, I told my husband, "Oh my gosh, get it off the table because it's gone bad." And he said, "No, it tastes fine." So, I would encourage your listeners, if they're considering that, give it a go and see how you feel. I've just found that actually I don't think alcohol's for me. I feel so much better off of it. I wondered, what am I going to say when I'm at parties and people offer me a drink? And I just say, no, thank you. Nobody comes to mind. I have a club soda. And also the other thing is I talk about time restricted eating in the book so that we can maintain our sensitivity to insulin and keep our sugar low at a healthy low level.
Yeah.
And that's one of the other things that's really helped me keep my eating window and my fasting window tighter, because that, the alcohol calories late in the evening wasn't really benefiting me in any way. So I wouldn't say 100% you have to abstain, But I would say if you think you can cut down, give that a try. If you want to give not drinking at all a try, see how you feel, see how your thinking is. You might find that it benefits you. And in the long term, there will be a benefit.
Yes, that's what we hope for.
Yes.
I have read somewhere that vascular dementia, the risk factor also includes depression and stress.
Yes.
How are they related? How true is that?
Yeah. So midlife depression is a risk factor for Alzheimer's disease, and treating that or alleviating that does reduce that risk. And so there's a wide spectrum of treatment for depression. We're learning a lot about gut health, and a lot of depression is tied to an unhealthy gut. So that's a place for a lot of people to start if they're having GI issues, bloating, gas, constipation, diarrhea, anything that kind of is in that kind of irritable bowel syndrome basket. It's worth addressing those issues because a lot of times healing the gut will domino effect into improved anxiety, improved depression. So that's really a root cause place to go. That can be a long road though. And so a lot of times it's important to discuss with people's doctors and actually incorporate medications to try to alleviate the depression or the anxiety. Anxiety also plays into this as a risk factor. I also, when I look at health, really in anything, there are medications, but those always need to be layered on top of a foundation of good health practices. So even if I'm treating people with dementia or Alzheimer's disease, it's already diagnosed and they're later in life, we can give them medications to try to ease the symptoms, to try to slow down the disease, but they won't outpace a terrible diet filled with sugar, not sleeping, not exercising. Those medications will really only work on top of that foundation. And depression, in my opinion, is very much the same way. We can use antidepressants to try to manage the symptoms to alleviate the depression and the mood symptoms. But if we're eating a terrible diet, our gut's unhealthy, if we're not exercising, we're not sleeping, those medications are not going to be able to overpower all the contribution from those other risk factors. So it really does need to be a holistic approach. There is work to be done from a lifestyle perspective in all of these diseases. So managing stress, I think meditation is very effective. Therapy, counseling, they all have a role to play in managing depression for day-to-day happiness and joy, and also for long-term managing that risk factor in terms of getting us away from developing Alzheimer's disease.
Okay, but how important is sleep? And what do we mean by sleep? How much should we sleep, if at all, something like that?
So sleep is interesting. Sometimes we just talk about length of sleep and we talk about it in kind of a one-dimensional way. Oh, I'm getting 7 or 8 hours of sleep. And I would like people to be getting 7 to 9 hours of sleep. But in addition to that, we need to be getting the right stages and depth of sleep. And so when we think about sleep, instead of just thinking of this one-dimensional length, we need to think of it as a two-dimensional structure. So we want length, but we also want depth. And so we have different phases of sleep. We have deep sleep, which I'm sure your listeners have heard about, and then also REM sleep, rapid eye movement, when we dream. So we need to be getting adequate amount of both of those. Both of those are involved in helping us consolidate memory. So they're really important for helping consolidate the things that we learned the day before. And then deep sleep has this other interesting mechanism where the brain actually shrinks a bit. It gets a little bit dehydrated while we're sleeping. And so the water areas that fill the brain expand. And that allows the toxins to diffuse out of the brain and get bathed in more clean water, or cerebrospinal fluid is actually what it's called, but it looks pretty much like water. It's pretty clear.
Yeah.
And so there's this detoxifying that goes on in the brain during deep sleep. And part of what's detoxified or removed from the brain is amyloid that was deposited in the previous day. And for your listeners, some may be familiar with amyloid is one of the toxins one of the abnormal proteins that we see deposited in the brain of Alzheimer's patients. So we want to get that deep cleaning every day when we sleep. And one of the things I think that's reassuring to your listeners, for those of you out there who are like me and wake up at 2 to 3 in the morning and worry about everything in the world, including, if I don't have something local to me to worry about, I'll find something to worry about. I'll be thinking about nuclear war or something, that I clearly can't solve myself at 3 in the morning, but my brain goes there. One of the things that was reassuring to me is I started wearing one of the health tracking rings. I was wearing an Aura ring. Don't have it on now, but I usually wear it. And what was interesting, I had a lot of anxiety about not getting enough sleep and not getting enough restorative sleep because, of course, I'm really aware of how important it is for my brain health. Once I started tracking my sleep, I saw an interesting thing. Because we do most of our deep sleeping early in the night, I actually was getting adequate amounts of deep sleep. I was getting over an hour of deep sleep a night, and that's enough to get the benefit of the brain cleaning of deep sleep. So I actually was reassured. And then I saw I actually also getting enough REM sleep, which is what tends to happen more between 1 in the morning and waking up. And so wearing that ring, instead of making me worry that I wasn't getting enough sleep and seeing how, inadequate my sleep was, it actually reassured me. So, it changed the profile of my worry at 2 in the morning. When I wake up at 2 in the morning, I think through things. I appreciate it as kind of quiet, clear thought. I sometimes do have some problem solving that's very effective, but it's taken the anxiety away from that. Looking at the clock, thinking I'm not getting sleep, it's taken away a lot of that. So I just want to give that reassurance to your listeners that if they're sleeping 7 to 9 hours and they're in that middle phase of life where we start breaking apart our sleep and they have that weird pattern of waking up at 2, transform the way you look at that. Do some purposeful thinking, maybe meditate to get back to sleep, maybe spend some time in prayer. If you have a faith life, it doesn't have to be a miserable period of time. So that's my new wisdom about sleep that I've learned in my mid-50s.
Yes. You're thinking about sleep because last night I was worried, like, I have to sleep on time because I have the new episode was released today. And I'm like, I need to get enough sleep because I have to now wake up and send out whatever that I need to send to let people know that the new episode has been released. And I've got an appointment, an interview, a conversation with Dr. Clarke. But yeah, I am not falling asleep and getting worried. So you are assuring me that no, do not worry, you've gotten it somewhere else along the way. It's just that I didn't measure it like you are wearing your ring and you are able to measure.
Yes.
That's what you are saying.
Yes. And if you do find that you're not getting adequate sleep, there are a lot of things we can do naturally and with sleep hygiene to promote and curate a better night of sleep. So I talk about that a lot in the book too. There's an action plan of how to incorporate all those little tweaks to get a healthier night of sleep.
Good. But tell me, Dr. Clarke, people who are living with different types of dementia, is their sleep affected differently? Let me say, for example, somebody who is living with vascular dementia and somebody with Alzheimer's, do their sleep patterns differ or it doesn't matter? Like this lady that I was caring for with vascular dementia, she didn't sleep at all. Like she would sleep just a little and she gets up and like, let's go out. Does different dementias have different experience of sleeping?
Sleep in all of the diseases that cause dementia is one of the biggest challenge areas for caregivers. So all dementia patients are different and they vary even within the same disease. Some Alzheimer's patients may start to break apart their sleep. Others may be sleeping like a baby. Some Alzheimer's patients will have hypersomnia and they'll start sleeping 10, 11, 12 hours per day, which I think, as far as being a caregiver, is really a blessing because the patients, the family members, the ones in our care who are not sleeping at night, it's such a challenge. And there really isn't necessarily a good way to help them get back to sleep easily. So in the patients who do break apart their sleep cycles, we all have sleep cycles and they're about an hour and a half long. for the most part. And so what happens with a lot of these patients is they'll go through a sleep cycle, and then we do naturally wake up between those, but most of the time we don't record that we're awake. And so we just go right back to sleep. Especially when we're children, we don't record it at all. Kids don't realize that they do wake up.
Mm-hmm.
But for these patients, they have that wakefulness, but they fully grasp it and they come to be fully awake. And now they're a bit rested because they've been through a sleep cycle, but not fully rested. So they're a bit crankier and more agitated, but they don't feel sleepy. And it really can be difficult to get them back to sleep. They may want to organize things. I've seen a lot of people at this stage, in the middle of the night, they want to go to the bathroom. They're organizing all their bathroom drawers. They really are active and they want to do something. And so that is one of the biggest factors for people being institutionalized and moving into a memory community, because it can be impossible for a caregiver, especially a family caregiver, who's managing their loved one all day long and really needs the rest and they need to sleep. And now they're doing the hardest work and they're not getting any rest. And the caregiver stress becomes overwhelming. And so that is often a breaking point for people. I visited a memory community and it was really inspiring. And it was one of the best ways I've seen of dealing with folks who get up and they're really active at night when they're breaking apart their sleep cycles. And it was a 2-story memory community. And so all of the folks that had that broken up sleep pattern, instead of trying to fight it and give them medicines and give them enough medicine to try to sleep through the night, which really, then they can wake up in the middle of the night and they're almost like drunk because they still have all these medicines on board and it's not keeping them asleep. Or they wake up in the morning and they're like have a hungover kind of medication drunkenness that can increase their risk of falls. It's really dicey to try to manage this with medications. What that memory community did, I thought was really clever. The difference about a memory community is they've got daytime caregivers, they've got nighttime caregivers. So unlike a family member caregiver who's exhausted at night, nighttime caregivers have just come on shift and this is their job to be awake. And so they had all the night owl memory residents on the second floor. And so when they would get up at night, they had a TV room up there and they would all, get them all directed and they would come on into the TV room and they had them fold all the napkins for the next day. And so they would have something to do with their hands, keep them busy, keep their brain a little busy, utilize that time, help them feel purposeful. And then eventually they would go back to bed. But trying to fight that wakeful period is one of the most challenging things for caregivers in general. I just don't know how you could do that at home. It's really hard to be, refreshed and have a good attitude and find something purposeful at 2 a.m. or 12 at night with the person you're caring for. That's really something you can only do in a memory community. But I thought it was such a enlightened way to look at that period and shift it into something positive and try not to fight it, because fighting it is so challenging.
That doesn't help at all. Yes, I've actually read some of the articles that say dementia caregivers face more stress and burnout compared to caregivers of other illnesses.
True. Yes, it's other diseases don't tend to affect sleep as much as the diseases that cause dementia. And you mentioned other people have different things. Lewy body disease is kind of on the spectrum related to Parkinson's disease. And those patients can have a lot of dysregulation of their REM sleep where they're actually like running, fighting in their sleep. So that can be a different challenge because they can hit their caregivers or their bed partner. They throw themselves out of bed. We do a lot of kind of safety around their bed environment. We want to be sure there's no sharp corners on bedside tables that are nearby, using kind of the child guards to make those softer or be sure they're round, but trying to make their environment safe. We really have to change their bedroom. And we try to manage that with medications also. But that's a really different flavor compared to some folks in terms of what happens at night for them.
Thank you about those strategies, those points that you've just given us. You talked about nutrition, you talked about sleep, you talked about physical exercise, you talked about alcohol and smoking, you talked about effects of stress and depression. Thank you for that.
You're welcome.
Let's talk about the last one now. I want us to talk about your book. There are so many books, Dr. Clarke, on dementia out there. How is yours different?
Agreed. I feel like with all this new data we have in brain health, it's exploding. And there is so much information. It's like you're drinking out of a fire hose, right? Is the expression. And I was feeling the same way. I have so many books on my shelves. I love books. I love learning. I love knowledge. And, I have a lot of these books on my shelves. They're 300 and 400 pages, and I'm just not getting through them. And some of them are too detailed, too deep. And then I felt like they gave such broad information of, you've got to turn your lifestyle upside down. You've got to be keto. And from where people are in their day-to-day lives to that kind of like hyper wellness is a huge span. And I don't think it's realistic to go to, for example, I don't know what the statistics are in the UK, but in the US, most of us are eating between 80 and 100 grams of added sugar per day. That's a lot. The American Heart Association recommends we be at 36 grams a day for men and 24 for women. So we are really eating way too much sugar. But to go from where we are to that level is, you just can't go from A to B directly. It takes some time. And so what I tried to do in this book was put together all the wisdom and advice and health coaching that I give my patients and now my younger patients to help them get there with as little pain as possible. Going from 80 grams to 24 grams for a woman is going to be super painful. We're addicted to sugar. That's going to cause withdrawal. That's not to be taken lightly. But the difference with this book is I explain the science behind how this is harming our brain. Then we talk about how we can alleviate that challenge, how we can rid that risk factor. And then the back of each chapter is an action plan with lots of tiny steps to start adopting these habits with less pain than you might expect. So, for example, one of the things your listeners might relate to is fancy coffee drinks that have a lot of sugar. And here, what my local coffee house, I looked at their nutrition panel, and like a white mocha has as much added sugar as like a little McDonald's hot fudge sundae. And so if we can clear those out, but really ask ourselves, like, what is it you enjoy about that? If you enjoy the coffee flavor, you enjoy the milk, you enjoy the sweetness of the chocolate, you could sit and have a latte with like a milk alternative that's not as full of sugar, like an almond milk or a higher fat milk in there, and then have a square of chocolate, and you'd enjoy that. But looking at some of these areas where we can cut out sugar, wheat bread is another example. There's a lot of wheat bread that has 4 or 5 grams of added sugar per slice, where sourdough has none. So there's some simple switches that we can make that will alleviate some big areas of sugar and some small areas of sugar, but it can just slowly start bringing that down. So that's the difference. A little bit of science and then some motivation on what we can do to change it, and then the actual steps of how to do that. And I would say to your listeners, we talked about alcohol. For a lot of people, that's going to be a non-starter. You don't have to adopt the whole action plan, but you need to start somewhere. And so maybe they read the book and adopt habits in 2 of the areas. And then maybe they come back to another chapter. And little by little incorporating this will really pay great dividends in brain health farther down the road.
That's lovely. And this book is for who? For the young people whose parents live with, or it's just for everyone?
It's for everyone. I mean, I think the people who will be the most motivated to utilize it are caregivers and the kids of people who have Alzheimer's disease or another dementia in their family. I think we're pretty motivated and we're looking for guidance. But of course, there are people who develop dementia and nobody else in their family ever had it. So I think it's for everybody. And the great news is that the things that are healthy for the brain are also healthy for the heart. They're healthy for all parts of the body. So if people adopt, for example, time-restricted eating, which is in the book and I recommend, and can sound intimidating, but I break it down for you. I mean, you also see the dividends of that in day-to-day life. It will help your body composition. It will, help promote your muscles, help lose fat. So part of the esoteric thing is we're doing all these habits for, hope that it changes our brain and we see those changes in 30, 40 years. But like a retirement account, you can log in every day and just see how much you have saved and how it's growing. And that's encouraging. And then you save more. For brain health,
Yes.
we might think we don't have that same ability to check in with our progress every day, but you do. One of the things when you start adopting these habits, you'll notice is that your focus will be better. If you feel at all foggy, you will feel less foggy. If you don't feel foggy, you will feel sharper. So you will see day to day dividends. You'll also see an improvement in the health of your body, in the way your body feels, and the way you move. So you can gauge that, even though we can't look inside our brain at this time and say, okay, here's the exact result of what I'm doing day
That
to
is
day.
happening.
You will get a sense that what you're doing has you on the right track. So that's how you can check in with your progress.
Great. And everything that you've just talked about is in your book, right?
Absolutely. I will guide you through it step by step. We'll meet you where you are. If you're already doing some exercise, it will meet you there and help you just kind of optimize it, buff it out. A lot of your readers, if they're already on the spectrum of, wellness, they may find whole chapters that they're already buffed out on. They don't even need to address. And that's great. And they might find it other areas that they hadn't thought about and buff those out. So I think it meets everybody where they are, whether that's zero exercise, whether that's already CrossFitting, whether that's walking every day, as an example in the exercise chapter, because I do think that's one of the hardest ones for people to approach if they don't exercise. But I think you can move, and I think you can find some movement that fits in your day, that fits in your lifestyle, and will benefit your brain health.
How do we get hold of your book?
It's on Amazon. It's Brain Health Action Plan. It's on Amazon in paperback and in Kindle ebook. If you're Kindle Unlimited, it's included free, and it will be for at least the next 90 days. So snap it up now while it's included.
La la. Thank you. What I respect again about what you just shared is because, yes, you wrote that book. You are an expert, a neurologist, but you've got people who lived with dementia. You've got your loved ones. So you're bringing that experience with your expertise together. So for me, as somebody who's experiencing dementia care, I'm understanding you totally. I know what you mean. I know what you're talking about. So thank you very much, Dr. Clarke, for your time. I really appreciate it.
I really appreciate you having me on. Thank you so much. And I hope it helps your listeners.
Dementia care. How deep is your love?